Can I talk about character beats a bit? My name is Gina. I'm an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. I don't talk about character beats as often because they are not quite as easy to quantify. When I am talking about developmental edits and story beats, there are 8 of them that I use when I am talking to people about this, but that is a super generalization. This is not perfect for everybody, but it's pretty flexible. That's why I use this particular structure, because it can overlay onto almost every story in almost every genre. So in my story structure that I use when I am plotting out developmental edits for people, we have the hook that establishes normal the inciting incident that puts your character on a new path, has them change directions. Pinch number 1, this will sometimes be like a call to adventure or like the first miscommunication in a romance, whatever. This is where things start to go wrong. This is filled in here for another video that may or may not have been posted by now. Midpoint, I leave this really big and generic because this is where we do genre specific stuff. Depends on what type of story you are writing. Then we have a pinch, a plot turn, the darkest moment, and then the resolution, which includes the denouement. And so that structure is pretty well expected for most stories. You can overlay that on almost every book and almost every movie, and there might be some wiggle room in there a little bit, but you're basically going to see those things kind of in that order, even if they are like a little bit longer or a little bit shorter or whatever, but it's going to go in the same order for the most part. But character beats are not as cut and dry, and so if we were looking at that one that I just had pre-filled in there was for The Little Mermaid, and so Ariel is our protagonist, and that's the one that we follow through most of the story, but Triton is also a pretty significant character, and he has his own beats. He is absent for a big part of the story because we are focused on Ariel instead, but if we were telling that story through his point of view, we would have more of like a bittersweet or a tragic ending, right? In which he is trying and failing to control his daughter, and then in the end he learns that he has to let her go, but it means that he's really letting her go. He's not going to see her anymore. And then we have like Ursula. She doesn't get introduced until like the end of Act 1, maybe even the beginning of Act 2, depending on how we're going to divide things up there. And so her beats aren't going to line up with the story overall, so we introduce her and kind of a little bit of what it is that she's upset about. And then we find out later on that she is spying on Ariel and she is cooking up some sort of a scheme, but we don't know what it is yet. And then you get Poor Unfortunate Souls, that reveals all of her backstory and reveals all of her motivations and why she is the way that she is. But if this was a main character, we would have needed to reveal that much earlier. But because she's not the protagonist, that beat gets explained much later on. And so characters, you have to remember every single character is the protagonist of their own story. It's just not the story that we are telling right now. It's just not the story that we are reading right now. And like Triton is the protagonist of his own story, and he ends up having a bittersweet ending. Ursula is the protagonist of her own story, and she has a tragedy. She ends up losing at the end of her story. But if you were to tell the story through their point of view, they would have many of those same beats. They would have a problem present itself that they want to try to solve, and they are going to try and fail to solve it over and over again. But those beats are going to be at odds with your protagonist beats oftentimes. The more minor your character, probably the later they get introduced and the fewer of their beats that we see. We know kind of a lot about what Sebastian wants out of life, and we see a lot of his story beats because they are tied up with Ariel's, but frankly, we don't really know that much about Eric. Like, he doesn't say a whole lot. We don't really know what it is that he really wants or what it is that he, like, there's not as much of his story involved. He is a pawn in Ariel's story to a large degree. And Grimsby, we really don't know almost anything of what it is that he wants. There's very few of his beats that are introduced within the story. So the more minor your character is, the fewer of those beats you will have on the page. Let's look at the chef, the one who just really wants to make beautiful, delicious dinners, and then he finds out that there's a live crab in his kitchen. That's his problem, is that there is a live crab in his kitchen, and he wants to eradicate the live crab. You, as the audience, are rooting for Sebastian to get away, so we have a try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, and at the end of it, the chef has gone crazy, his kitchen is a mess, and he still hasn't found that dang crab. So he has a failure, and then we never come back to it again. That's the end of his story. All of your characters are protagonists of their own story. It's just a story that we are not reading or listening to right now, but they do not need to all necessarily be on the page. The more minor the character, the fewer beats you are going to introduce, even though the ones that do get introduced will be in the same order as the ones that you introduce for your protagonist.